Welcome to the Airgun Extra Podcast, brought to you in association with Crackshot, the Southwest's premier airgun centre and ranges. You can find a link to their website in the show description. I'm Matt Manning, and with me this evening is my friend Rich Saunders. Hi Rich, how you doing?
Hi Matt, hi everyone.
Hello.
I'm good, thank you.
Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. Well, obviously we've got a lot to get through this evening. We have been testing some pellets again, so we've got some ammo tests to look at. We've got the usual Q&A section brought to you in association with Anglia Tackle and Gun. We were also hoping to have a catch-up with Tony Beelis from Daystate, BRK and MTC. Unfortunately, he is having internet problems, so we'll have to park that for another time. Before we get right into it, Rich, let's have a bit of a catch-up as to what we've been up to shooting-wise recently. What have you been doing?
Well, you know, I've been enjoying this decent bit of weather. For a try. It seems like nearly all of my shooting since I can remember has been in the dark, in the rain, and in the cold. But I've spoken before about my fruit farm permission, and I shoot rabbits there all the time at night. But they have a terrible problem with pigeons and corvids eating the crop as well. Especially at the moment, they're eating all the buds on the blueberry plants. Now, normally I can't get around the farm during the day because of the workers. You know, the workers are working there, and obviously you can't be shooting when they're working there. But you know, for a few months before it starts getting dark again, I had this sort of short window of time between the workers knocking off and it getting too dark, where I can really crack down on the pigeons and the corvids. So that's what I've been doing most recently. And yeah, it makes a change to not be shooting pigeons and corvids from a hide or at roost. So I've actually been stalking pigeons and corvids, which has been great fun. You know, really challenging. I shoot an awful lot from the truck as well, but just recently I've been on foot stalking them, which has been good. Now that and the usual squirrel shooting, although that's not been so good just recently, and you know, rats are a constant challenge. How about you? What have you been up to?
Like you, trying to make the most of the good weather, which after the winter we had has just life's just been so much easier having dry weather. Although I've got a sneaky feeling that by the time people see this podcast, that might have changed a bit, but just having dry ground to work with rather than being knee deep in mud and it's not raining all the time. What a novelty. So like you actually, I've been shooting corvids and pigeons, and also because of the damage that they're doing to fruit crops. In this instance, it's an apple orchard, and the birds, rooks in particular, but also wood pigeons, are descending onto the apple trees and nipping the buds, the forming apple buds off of the trees, which obviously that could be detrimental to the crop because every bud they take away is another apple that's not going to form. So that's been quite interesting, and I haven't been as brave as you or as ambitious as you to try and stalk them. There's a little spinney that flanks the orchard, and the birds tend to flight to the taller trees on the edge of the spinney for a bit of a recce before they drop down. So I've been able to tuck myself into the woods and pick them off before they're dropping into the apple trees. Because another problem is, once they're in the apple trees, obviously the apple trees are pruned to be like bushes almost, so they're easy to harvest. But it means you're taking shots at quite a low angle, which isn't the safest way to take shots. But also because they're so regularly pruned, they're very, very twiggy and quite dense. So it's almost impossible to get clear shots at the birds once they're in there. So I've been picking them off from their vantage points before they drop in. And I've also, a real novelty for me, been doing a bit of rabbit shooting. So yeah, I've picked up a reasonable rabbit permission, and the rabbits there are still not too savvy, so I'm managing to shoot a few by daylight. Haven't had to sort of go over to night shooting yet, which obviously isn't quite so appealing at this time of year. So yeah, that's me really, a nice mix.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I used to have a permission that was an apple orchard, and the issue there was parakeets, and you know, I would and squirrels. The squirrels would eat the apples as well. And the problem was they would just take one massive chunk out of an apple, and then move on to the next apple. So they were ruining so many apples and probably only eating a quarter of an apple in total. But they were a massive problem, huge problem. And the lady there, it's only a relatively small apple orchard, but she sold them, from a little kind of country store. And yeah, huge problem.
Yeah, I think usually when people think about, excuse me, when people think about avian pests and crop protection, the first thing to spring to mind is cereal farming, arable crops being drilled or ripening off, and people forget that you've got these orchards. There used to be a cherry farm close to where I live as well, and they used to suffer terribly with jays in particular. So yeah, there's much more to controlling avian pests than just protecting typical types of corn crops and other arable crops.
Yeah. I'm lucky down on the fruit farm because there's always workers in the fields all the time. The birds, they're relatively used to people. I mean, they're not, naive to that stretch, but they're not, most pigeons, they see me from 300 yards away and they're off straight away. These ones are, give you a little bit more of a chance, which is quite good. And the magpies know that they can't be shot because they just dance around 30 yards in front of me all the time that I'm there.
We've got an article from you about shooting this permission, haven't we?
Yes.
On the website airgunextra.com. I thought this all sounded very familiar because I posted it on the website for you.
It's becoming more familiar to me the more I talked about it as well, actually.
What was I going to say? So yeah, you say the birds there are quite bold because they're accustomed to human disturbance. Do you find they almost become more suspicious if you try to creep around and look like a hunter than if you just stroll around like a worker?
Yeah, corvids in particular. I'm sure corvids can read your body language.
Yeah.
Because funny enough, on this particular trip, there's a big reservoir, agricultural reservoir, and I could see this cloud of just black birds quite a way in the distance while I was making my way down the various different blueberry rows. And because I thought I'll never get anywhere near them, I kind of didn't look like I was stalking them to shoot them. And all of a sudden I found myself within 40 or 50 yards of them. And they were largely ignoring me because, I didn't look like a shooter. And I managed to get a couple. But yeah, I mean, certainly, yeah, corvids in particular. Yeah, they you can walk around with like the old story goes, you can walk around with a broom over your shoulder and they'll ignore you. As soon as you get a gun out, they'll fly away.
I find it on virtually every farmyard permission that I've got. If they're shooting crows, rooks, jackdaws, you name it. But the trouble is, it's almost impossible to not creep around when you are hunting. I find it really difficult. You stand around chatting to the farmer when I turn up, and I'm not thinking about stealth, and there seem to be birds everywhere. And I think, right, I'm going to move about like this and not be too stealthy. Take the gun out of the car. The second I pick a gun up, it's almost impossible not to creep around like a predator. And that body language must be so obvious to the birds because they do. They pick up on it immediately. And they also seem to have a gift to be able to hold back about 50 meters. So they're kind of just about out of range.
Yeah. I suppose, when you've grown up with everything wanting to shoot you, eat you, kill you, you sort of, these defenses become ingrained after a while.
Yeah,
I even see it with rabbits, to be honest. There's a permission that I go on that's some paddocks. And if I rock up there and chat with the stable manager or something, the rabbits will run around the field. As soon as it all gets quiet, they all go and I get my gun out. The rabbits disappear.
You can't blame them.
No, why not?
Yeah. Well, that's what we've been up to. Let's move on to this pellet testing because Adrian at iHunter has sent us some more pellets to test, which is always nice. Now, in the past, he's given us discount codes, and fun enough, there you go. Rich is showing off his freebies. I was going to say, in the past, Adrian's given us a discount code that we've been able to offer to podcast listeners to take advantage of. And I did actually ask him about this, Sam. I said, "Can you do us a discount code?" And he said, "No." Oh. I thought, oh, okay. But actually, he's got a pretty fair reason. He said he's been right through the entire range, and he's just a lot of people have sort of feeling the pinch a bit lately, and he's trying to cut the cost across the entire range. So he said, look, whether people want the kit or the ammo that you're testing or something different, he's done his best to shave his prices as low as he can. So that's why we can't offer a discount
That's
code.
fair enough, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. He's nipped everything in as much as he can. So yes, it's iHunter.co.uk. Do have a look at their website, full of information about all of the ammo, and it's a huge range of ammunition that they stock. But don't go there just yet, because we will tell you about how we've been getting on with these pellets. I'm going to have to keep glancing at my notes here because I want to get the facts and figures right. So the first one that I've got here, I've got the Rifle Destroyer Field, which I was given in 177.
And I have in 22.
So yeah, it's a hollow point pellet, but it's got like that little pimple in it that I think is supposed to help it with deforming. Let me get the facts and figures. So, as I said, I had 177 caliber. That weighs 8.18 grains, so it's around about an 8 grain 177 pellet. And iHunter are selling them for $9.99 for a tin of 500, which is pretty good. Now they're nice, tidy-looking, clean, consistent-looking pellets, but I still wanted to manage my expectations because I think often with hollow point pellets, they're not the most aerodynamic, and the long-range grouping doesn't tend to be brilliant. And to be honest with you, that was pretty much the case with these. Probably, well, I'd say certainly better than I'd expected, but it's not a pellet you're going to be using at long range. So yeah, I'd say at 30 meters, the grouping was a bit loose for what I would demand from a hunting pellet. However, at 20 meters, and again, I'll hold the group up, but hopefully we can get an image of it up. So that's at 20 meters, and that's a pretty typical group. 12 millimeters from center to center, and at 15 meters, they were virtually stacking on top of each other. So very tight groups at 15 meters. So out to 20, maybe 25 meters, you've got that hollow point wallop. So I would imagine it could be a pretty good round to try, maybe if you're controlling rats at fairly close quarters around farm buildings, that kind of thing. And in fact, I would say, so those tests I shot from a bench, calm conditions, ran them through my Day State Huntsman Safari, 177 caliber, sub 12, 5-shot groups, and the usual caveat applies, and that is obviously you're almost certain to get different results with different guns, different barrels. So take our findings as a guide, but obviously to the same token, take them with a pinch of salt until you've ran some through your own gun. So 2-2 wise, Rich, how did you get on?
My experience was almost exactly the same, Matt. Opened up, to probably a slightly unacceptable level at 30 meters, but at 15 and 18 meters, the two distances I tested over, because that's how I tend to shoot rats over, absolutely spot on. And in actual fact, I took them out for a rat shooting session, and I used them in my BRK Ghost 12-foot pound rifle. And it was great, just really, really good, just hit everything I aimed at. I didn't get, sometimes down on the permission, I get shots that's sort of a little bit further out, 25, 30 meters. Although I'd set everything into the ballistic calculator, I didn't get any shots this particular night with them. So I didn't kind of get to see if they would be accurate enough for rats. But my experience on the range would suggest probably not. But I really like the fact that they come in a screw top tin. That's a rarity nowadays. So the back of my truck isn't awash with thousands of pellets on the floor.
Yeah, a proper screw top tin and a slice of foam in there as well to stop them bashing around.
Yeah, no, I thought that for rat shooting, and I don't know what the price is, Matt, because it's 250 pellets in a tin for the 2.2s.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the price is, but I'm sure they're going to be just as reasonably priced as the 177s.
Yeah. And as we said, have a look at the iHunter website, iHunter.co.uk. And in fact, we'll talk about the prices. There are also like multi-saver discounts. I think there's a thinking on my feet. I think it's 3% saving if you buy 3 tins, 5% if you buy 5 tins, 10 if you buy 10 or more.
Wow.
That's off the top of my head, but there's definitely a multi-purchase saving to be made. So there's further savings to be made there. So the next one that I was shooting on the range was the rifle dome field. And again, I will hold the tin up to the screen, but we'll try to get a shot of that up to show you in a bit more detail and to let you see what these pellets look like. So this is a really classic looking domed pellet. The 177, which I had, weighs 7.86 grains. So again, the sort of ballpark of your 8 grain 177. Once again, very, very tidy, very clean, very consistent looking in the tin. And I believe that the 177s retail at just $8.99 for 500. So let's have a look at my findings with these. So again, I was running them through the Safari, and they were grouping very well, actually. Center to center, I was getting plenty of sub 20 millimeter groups at 40 meters. And they were really, really good at 30 meters. I've got a 30 group here, and again, we'll try to get a proper shot of that up. So there is the 30 meter group, which is nice and tight, 5-shot group there. That's 12 millimeters from center to center. So, what's that? Less than £9 for a tin of 500 in 177. That's pretty good performance for what I regard as a very sensibly priced pellet. 2.2s?
Yeah, these ones are a little bit heavier than the sort of the what I consider to be the standard 2.2 weight. These are 18.36 grains.
Okay.
Which is funny because I shoot I've got a 30 foot-pound FX DRS, and I shoot JSB heavies with that at 18.13 grains, and it's an absolute laser with those. So I thought, that's a close comparison. And these domes have, I quite like the fact that they have like kind of lines on the skirt. The skirt is ridged, like kind of old-fashioned pellets, like the old Ely Wasps. And at 30 meters, I can't honestly say that I could see any difference between those and the JSBs in my 30 foot-pound DRS. At 40 meters, possibly they opened up a little bit, but that could easily have been me having a bad magazine full. And again, really, really good. Yeah, I quite like them. I didn't take them out hunting at all, but they were sort of comparable just about with the JSB heavies, which is obviously a much more expensive pellet. So no, I don't have any qualms at all about taking them hunting.
Good stuff. The third and final one that I had on the range was the Supermagnum field. So that's rifle Supermagnum field. And as with the others, you've got your screw top tin, wedge of foam, very neat, tidy. I mean, we've used quite a few rifle pellets for these tests now, and they do seem to be incredibly consistently and cleanly produced, which is always reassuring when you open a tin of pellets, isn't it? So the Supermagnum field, again, it's a domed pellet, slightly elongated looking dome on these. That was certainly the case with the 177s. And as the name suggests, Supermagnum, they are a little bit heavier, just over 10 grains in 177. And again, they're only $8.99 for a tin of 500. Sorry, $8.99 for a tin of 500, which is pretty impressive when we move on to their performance. So my Huntsman Safari really liked these. Groups were tight at 30 meters, and they remained tight at 40 meters. So I've got a 40 meter group here, 14 millimeters from center to center. And that wasn't an unusual or exceptional group. Obviously, they're going to drop a little bit more than your standard weight 177s, but I think for that improvement in tighter grouping, I'm happy to use a bit of holdover. and you're probably going to get a bit more of a smack from them when they strike the target as well, because they're carrying that little bit more weight and momentum.
Mm. So the 2.2s weigh 19.9 grains,
Right.
which is quite a lump for a 2.2. And I tell you what, they remind me of, and I think I got the name right here, the Air Arms Statons or Stratons. I can't remember using them ever, but I remember seeing a few. I think the name is right. I'm sure someone will correct me. But yeah, you're right. It's like almost like a sort of a cross between a sort of semi-pointed domed pellet, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. It's a bit like the QYS streamlined.
Yes.
I think the Bisley Magnum's got a slightly longer nose to it as well, and a longer sort of cone at the front. So it's that sort of stretched dome, isn't it?
Yeah. But I thought, stick them in my FXDRS, so a heavy pellet, it's an FAC gun, and it worked fine with that, the similar kinds of groups that you were getting, Matt. And then for some reason I thought, you know what, this pellet needs to go in my 12 foot-pound BRK Ghost and go ratting with it. So I saved another profile on my Thermite scope set up for these 19.9 grain pellets, and I went out ratting with them, and boy, do they hit with a wallop. I mean, I was almost picking the rats up with a sponge. So yeah, very good. 15, 18 meters, as accurate as the destroyer pellets, but almost half as heavy again. So yeah, really like these for rat shooting. Obviously, the velocity goes down a little bit because you're talking about nearly 20 grains, but over short distances, really packs a wallop. Yeah, I like those.
Great. And also, using heavier ammo these days, if you're using a digital scope with a ballistic calculator, working with the laser rangefinder, it's kind of neither here nor there anymore, is it? Because the aim point is where it needs to be every time anyway.
Yeah. I should be keeping these. Ian's not getting these.
Good stuff. No, I've been very, very impressed with these, as with the rifle pellets that we've had previously. So yeah, if you want to find out more about those, do have a look at iHunter.co.uk. As I said, it's a really straightforward website to navigate. Loads of ammo on there, lots of information about each pellet on there, and they also, I'm not sure whether it's for all lines or for some lines, but you can get sample packs, which means if you want to try different ammo, you don't have to splash out on a full tin to try a few to see whether they suit your barrel. Right then, so moving on to our Q&A section, brought to you in association with Anglia Tackle and Gun. Anglia Tackle and Gun, based in Norwich. They stock a lot of air guns and air gun accessories. I will also put a link to their website in the show description, and we did have a discount code. Assuming that it's still valid, I will pop that there too. Rich, do you want to kick us off with the first question?
Yeah, this is a really good, and I thought this was just me until I got this question in. But a chap called Dave Ellis asks, "Where have all the grey squirrels gone?" And as I said, I thought this was just me, but obviously Dave's having the same issue as well. You seen many squirrels down by you, Matt?
Do you know what? There are fewer here. It's not as stark as some people seem to have noticed, that the sudden disappearance or reduction in grey squirrels. And I've heard it from countless people. Lots of people messaging me, including Keith Watson, actually, of Keith's High Seats, that makes the feeders that you and I use. He does a hell of a lot of grey squirrel control. I think it's just this winter he's taken on a huge permission where the gamekeeper had been saying to him, it's crawling with squirrels. And in spite of his best efforts with his feeders, and obviously, he wants these squirrels so he can try out prototype feeders and things also, but he hasn't seen a fraction of what he'd expected. And it does seem to be quite a common story up and down the country.
Why do you think that is?
What do I think it is? Well, what I would say first of all is we shouldn't be sad about that. The fact that is the goal. We're not talking about a native species here. Grey squirrels are an introduced species. So if they all disappeared and weren't here tomorrow, a few of us might wonder what we're going to do on Saturday morning to fill our time. But it's going to be a good thing that they shouldn't be here. They're destructive to our woodland habitat. All sorts of vulnerable wildlife is suffering because of them, including in particular our native red squirrel. So if grey squirrels were to disappear overnight, that would be a good thing. Why do I think it is? I think there are numerous factors. Obviously, there are lots of people like us doing our best to reduce their numbers. And I think we're doing it a hell of a lot more efficiently than we used to. It wasn't many years ago, before we were using feeders, we'd go out for a rove around the woods of a day or an evening, and if you shot 2 or 3 squirrels, you thought you'd done well. Now we're using feed stations. It's nothing, the first 1 or 2 visits I pay to a feeder after I've had it running for a couple of weeks, I might shoot 12, 13, 14 squirrels per sitting. I had a feeder not so long ago that did 90 squirrels. So, and there are woods now where I'm employing bait stations, and before using feeders, I was probably shooting let's say 60 squirrels each winter in those woods, and thinking I was doing well. There are now, or have been, few, not just recently, but over the last few years, there have been fewer sightings of squirrels because I've been using feeders. But I'm still shooting more than before I was using feeders because they're just so effective. So all of us, times that by however many airgun shooters are doing what we do. If it wasn't making a difference to the number of grey squirrels nationally, something's going wrong. So I think that plays a big part, the fact that we're all doing a more effective job. I think also, by the sounds of it, talking to a lot of people, last autumn's nut crop was a bit lean. So right across the board, hazelnuts, acorns, etc., etc. So arguably, squirrels were going into the winter fairly compromised. And then we have had what must have been a really, really bad winter for grey squirrels. Now they don't mind a bit of cold, but they hate the wet. They don't like getting wet. So if you're quite a small wild animal and you get wet during the day, and then you've got to get through a cold night, and although it was a very wet winter, it was also a very cold winter at times. So I think quite a few have probably perished as a consequence of that. And we also had a long period, I think it was over 2 or 3 weekends in succession, we had these blocks of outrageously windy weather. A lot of trees came down, but I also saw even trees that hadn't come down. Quite a few drays had been blown out. So you've now got squirrels that have had a diminished nut crop through the autumn, so they haven't gone into a winter at sort of the health and the weight that they should be. It's got very wet. It's got very cold. They haven't had their usual drays, so they've arguably been a lot more exposed to it. And I think, thinking about it properly and carefully, a lot of squirrels have just perished this winter because of the weather. That's what I think the main reasons are. And anything to add to that, Rich?
Yeah, I think you hit them all there, Matt. I would say on your point about it's a good thing. If anything, now is the time when we should be stepping up, or at least sustaining our squirrel control, because I know what's going to happen. People are going to be fed up sitting in a hide and getting 2 or 3 squirrels when they're used to getting a dozen or more. So they'll just stop shooting squirrels for a while, and they'll do something else. And in that time, the remaining squirrels will build up their numbers again, and to a certain extent, will repopulate themselves. Whereas, if you keep the pressure on, then we've got even more chance of hitting them even harder. And I've got a permission that I only picked up back end of the year before last, I think. And I started off there, and I was shooting 18, 20 squirrels a time. I shot, well over 100 in a couple of months, and I was just going gangbusters. And then towards the sort of end of last year, it really slowed down, and I thought, oh, this is good. This is down to me. I'm a shooting genius. And what I'm suspecting now, though, is that I'm not a shooting genius. What's happened is that for a lot of the reasons you just talked about, the squirrel population is less. But I've still got my trail cameras up there, so I am still seeing the occasional squirrel, not so many, but I'm going back just as often as I used to, and accepting that I might only get a couple of shots, 3 shots in a session, because I think the woods that I'm shooting on has an obligation to the Forestry Commission to control the squirrels there. So it's not like doing it for fun. It's Forestry Commission funded woodland management. So I'm kind of feel obliged to sit in the hide for hours and hours and hours and get 2 shots. But that's what it is.
I think that's a brilliant point also about not taking your foot off the gas now, because it is easily done and they will bounce quickly. I have no doubt. They're that kind of species. They're usually having a couple of litters a year. Some people would argue that they now breed right round the year. They have the potential to bounce incredibly quickly. Now is a prime opportunity to really grind down their numbers. And you're absolutely right. It's before I move a feeder, I want at least 1 blank session in the hide. And that has to be from a pattern of maybe the couple times before I only shot 1 or 2. But you should have 1 or 2 blanks before you decide to move on somewhere else. Otherwise, you're not doing the job. You've just left some seed there for the next generation. Obviously, the vacuum you create will be filled quickly enough anyway. But you've got to do your absolute best. I think you get a lot of these people that might scoff at you and I when we go out, and maybe there are occasions because we've been so ruthless, we're only shooting 2 or 3 or none, and they're posting photos constantly of shooting 8, 10, 15, 20. If they're always shooting 8, 10, 15, 20 from the same place, they're not doing any good, clearly. They're not shooting it hard enough and frequently enough, because the numbers should be decreasing. And then, of course, there's the argument, once you've ground them down, you either target another area of those woods or move on to another permission, and you can bet your bottom dollar when your back's turned, those numbers do creep up. But you do have a duty and a responsibility to the people that have given you permission to do that shooting, to stick around during the tough times and keep going, because like I said at the start, this isn't like culling wood pigeons, crows, magpies, which are a native species and do have a role to play in our ecosystem. However, there are times when they're problematic, or there are just simply too many of them. This is an introduced, highly destructive introduced species that we're looking to eradicate. So keep the pressure on now, because it's a prime opportunity to maybe have a year or 2 when their damage is greatly reduced.
I'll tell you one thing I've noticed on these woods where the squirrel numbers have dropped down either because of me or just natural circumstances is I've seen 2 or 3 edible dormice, or gliss. Now, I'm pretty certain that when I started shooting there, I wouldn't see those at all. But the last, couple of months or so, I've seen 2, I think. So it's not like it's overrun with them. But, if they're in the woods and running around, it might be a different issue for the landowner. But there's another species, another introduced species, but there's something else that's coming in, and that would indicate to me that the squirrel population is not as plentiful as it used to be.
Exactly, and also, although that is another non-native and not entirely desirable, it could be quite a good barometer that a native dormouse and other songbirds and other woodland wildlife that's been impacted by grey squirrels is also bouncing back, because for whatever reasons their numbers are lower. And I think we all notice it when we put feeders up. When you first put a feeder up, you get loads of birds visit it, and that's great because the activity attracts squirrels. But once the squirrels turn up, the songbirds back away a bit because they're literally bullied away from it. But again, at the other end of that campaign, when you start to really grind the squirrel numbers down, you notice songbirds coming back around the feeder. And hopefully this is happening on more of a national scale now, rather than just the local one around one feed station. But like I said, I would very much expect that it's a blip. It is a great opportunity for us to really crack down on them. But my suspicion is they will bounce back, and probably pretty swiftly.
So I've got another question here, which is a good one as well. It's an anonymous question, but it's asking: is a silencer necessary on an air gun? I bet you've got silencers on all your guns, haven't you, Matt?
Yeah, of course I have. And as someone who does a lot of live quarry shooting, I regard them as being essential. Firstly, because I believe it makes me a more stealthy hunter. We've talked about this before. You don't really know what's going on from what you hear at your end. But I believe that having a silencer, moderator, suppressor, whatever people are going to tell us off for not calling them, on my gun, I believe that does make me a more stealthy and more effective hunter. So if nothing else, it's giving me more confidence. But also, quite often, I need to control pests discreetly, because maybe it's a garden job with grey squirrels that are causing damage in someone's roof space or whatever. They don't want the squirrels in their garden. Now, I need to do it discreetly because they don't want their neighbour moaning about the fact that there are squirrels being shot next door. So, again, discreet pest control, got a silencer on the gun, shooting rats around farm buildings. I don't, if there's livestock in there. Truth is, you get so much noise on farms, I don't expect it to make a huge difference to the livestock. But I like to think that I'm not spooking them because I'm using a silencer. I do quite a lot of practice out in the garden. And again, it's not pestering my neighbours as much because the gun's got a silencer. So for me, yes, it's an essential piece of kit. If you were a field target shooter, probably don't make any odds, does it?
Yeah.
What about you?
I think it makes me a more confident shooter, because I feel more like I'm a little ninja creeping around the bushes kind of thing. But and certainly I do a lot of shooting around horses on paddocks, and I would say it's an absolute necessity around them. And I even to the point when I go and meet a prospective new permission owner who at some paddocks, I always take a rifle with me. Just put it in the back of the truck, because horse owners are always concerned about the noise that you're going to make. So I just offer to dry fire an air rifle with a silencer on it, and I always pick a quiet one. And they're always massively underwhelmed at the sound it makes. So, but the thing is, silencers obviously will make your rifle more quiet, but they'll do nothing to reduce the sound of a pellet hitting a rabbit or hitting a squirrel. It's always going to be louder, and it's going to be closer to other rabbits and rats and squirrels. So I think it's probably not absolutely necessary all the time in terms of your success. But for kind of environmental considerations, yes, it's necessary. I've got a friend of mine, Neil, who shoots rats with an unsilenced Daystate Regal, the bolt action rifle, and he shoots just as many rats as I do with my silenced rifle. But I think, I mean, you're right. I think it's more a case of the environment in which you're shooting, and possibly, it's not so important from a quarry perspective. I shoot squirrels on a metal feeder, and half the time the pellet goes through the squirrel and hits the metal feeder and makes a big clang. Now, no silencer's going to deal with that, and yet it doesn't seem to put the squirrels off. But generally speaking, I think I would feel a little bit naked if I went out shooting with an unsilenced gun.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And I think also there's a good point about the crack of the pellet, certainly when it hits a rabbit's skull, being much louder than a silenced air gun. But sometimes that's quite useful, especially if you're sort of tucked in on your belly. Maybe 2 or 3 rabbits have come out, and you whack one, and you get that ringing crack that still summer's evening sort of rolls across the valley from the pellets basically smashing through the bone. But what happens is then all of the rabbits, if they don't bolt, they turn to look at the one that's just copped it. Yeah, exactly. They all bolt upright, looking in the direction of the crack of the skull, not paying attention to the sort of click clack of me cycling the bolt again, or side lever or whatever it is, whatever gun I'm using. And often a prime opportunity to wallop maybe 1 or 2 more before they wise up. But no, for me, like you say, it's that confidence. It's like people say, does camo clothing work? Well, truth is, we'll never really know. But I'm more confident doing what I do if I think I'm a bit less visible than usual.
Yeah.
Right, what else have we got? So, right, next question. What is your favourite airgun quarry and why?
Oh, I think it's yes is probably the answer.
Yeah.
I love my rat shooting, partly because I tend to do that more with a couple of buddies of mine, and in between shooting rats, we're talking nonsense and drinking tea. So I enjoy those evenings. I think probably my favourite quarry probably would be wood pigeons, actually, because I think they are a challenge. All of my rabbit shooting tends to be, ambushing rabbits or shooting from the truck. My squirrel shooting tends to be all from a hide over a feeder. Rat shooting tends to be the same. Pigeon shootings, I could be shooting them at roost in the evening, or decoying them during the day, or as I have been recently, stalking them on the fruit farm. So there's a bit more variety there. And I think, when I think about it, probably, if I see 20 rats of an evening, I'll probably shoot 10 of them. If I see 20 rabbits of an evening, I might shoot 10 of them. If I see 20 wood pigeons, I might shoot one or two, because they're just that much harder. But the bottom line is I enjoy all my shooting all throughout the year. But if I could only do one, it would probably be very, very stupid, naive wood pigeon. How about you?
Well, much the same. Almost impossible to choose. For me, it's usually whatever I'm going to be shooting next, because that's what I'm most excited about. At the moment, I'm obviously quite excited to have some rabbit shooting again, because it's been quite quiet in my part of the world. So yeah, to have been approached by somebody that's literally overrun with them at the moment, that's really interesting. And obviously it's nice to get a few for the pot. I love my grey squirrel shooting because we've touched on it already. I think that's the most beneficial shooting, arguably, that airgun shooters do in terms of conservation and making a meaningful contribution to improving woodland habitat, grey squirrel control every time. Certainly in the winter, I love my rat shooting. I think there's something really sort of cozy and exciting about tucking in at the farm, picking them off under the cover of darkness, the noises of the livestock around you. I love that atmosphere. And again, pigeon shooting, really challenging, particularly hide shooting over like fresh drills. Really challenging shooting. And they're delicious, which helps too. But then again, I find most things delicious, whether pigeons, rabbits, grey squirrels. I don't like to waste too much, so really difficult to choose. I would probably be stuck between grey squirrels because of the benefit of it, and ratting because it's usually quite busy and there's something quite cozy about being on the farm in the winter and in the darkness. So yeah, probably those two. If I had to pick one, I'd be stuck. I don't know.
I'd love to know from people watching, listening to us, what their favourites are and why as well. So if you've got a view, stick it in the comments, because I genuinely love to know.
Definitely, we're always glad to hear from you in the comments. So yeah, let us know what your favourite airgun quarry is. We'd certainly love to hear, and also any questions that you'd like us to pick up on in future podcasts. So the next question I have, this I've definitely been asked this one before. The rabbits on my permission are getting increasingly wary to the point that it's getting really hard to get close enough for a shot. Any tips? Any tips then, Rich?
Yeah, I mean, this is a sort of, it goes back a little bit to the grey squirrel thing. The more you shoot, the fewer there are to shoot. I would say that the biggest mistake that people make is that they get a new permission. There's lots of rabbits on there, and they go out the first couple of times and they shoot, a few rabbits, and they think that's great, and so they want to go the next week, the next day, and they go every few days or every week, and they're going to the same places each time because that's where they shot rabbits before, and the rabbits just become gun shy. They become wary of you stomping about. So I would say definitely think about how often you're shooting on your permission. If I can, I tend to divide my permissions up into sectors, if they're big enough, and concentrate on one sector at a time and rotate them so that I can shoot the same permission maybe 6 times over 6 weeks, but shooting in different places each time. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is also, rabbits are really hard to stalk, and they've got thousands of years of everything wanting to kill them and eat them. So they've got pretty good at avoiding those sorts of things. So ambush tactics will always outperform stalking tactics. I don't, generally speaking, I don't worry too much about approaching upwind, downwind, because most of the places I shoot, there's enough human activity somewhere for rabbits to get a whiff of a human. And I don't worry too much about trying to creep into position if I'm ambushing rabbits, because I'd far rather spook a couple of rabbits from 200 yards away than get within 50 yards and then frighten the life out of them and then have them run away. If rabbits sort of kind of wander into the hedgerow out of a sense of precaution, then it's really likely they're going to come out again within 20 minutes, half an hour. If they dash into the hedgerow because they're terrified, then you won't see them for the rest of the day. So I would tend to sort of not be too obvious 200 yards out, get myself into position. All the usual things about if you're ambushing, make sure you have a little bit of cover behind you. Ideally, get down as low as you possibly can. Certainly avoid skyline too. Just be prepared to kind of wait it out. And obviously, the more time you spend on your permission, the better you will know your permission, and the more likely you will know where rabbits are likely to be. So you can be the best ambush hunter in the world, but if you're ambushing a spot that hasn't got any rabbits in, it's going to be a long day. I would say ambushing, and don't shoot too often. Try and sort of curb your enthusiasm. How about you, Matt? Anything to add to that? Now that you've...
Well, I'd certainly say you are dead right about not creeping in too stealthily if you're going to set up for an ambush. And this sort of harks back to what we've just been saying about body language. And I firmly believe that if I just yomp into wherever, I'm not stamping around, but if I just stroll into where I'm going to be staking out rabbits, it's usually on my belly. I think the rabbits that are running away then when I'm still some way away quite likely think they're just dodging a walker who means them no harm. Whereas if I'm trying to stalk in and thinking, I might even get a shot at one before I settle in, again, you've got that kind of prowling predator body language. All of the rabbits that have disappeared under the ground are thinking there's somebody up there that's got bad intentions, I think. Whereas if you just stroll in fairly nonchalantly, you just look like another walker and don't stare at them too much. They'll run away before you get too close and hopefully come out again when they think that the threat has passed. But certainly the vast majority of my daylight rabbit shooting is done on my belly. I think it's massively underrated in terms of the effectiveness. Stalking, as you've said, is really, really tricky. Good fun, really good fun, but not effective, not efficient like ambushing is. So quite often I try and find the most active area or areas, target them one at a time, get down on my belly. It means I can also decide, having seen where the rabbits have disappeared or where they're likely to emerge, I can then work out the sort of distance I'm going to be shooting over. And then when they come above ground, it's no movement, no noise. I'm virtually on aim. I've got the support of a bipod. Thank you very much. Really straightforward shooting. Again, I think you're right about not shooting too frequently, but I think that doesn't mean you're shooting less rabbits. It could even mean you end up shooting a lot more. So I would be trying to sort of have those longer sessions maybe, but spread them out more. So rather than going 2 or 3 nights a week and just going for an hour and shooting 1 or 2, I'd go for longer sessions, try and shoot bigger bags, then lay off for a while so they're not getting too spooked. Then go back again, maybe target a slightly different area, but do it thoroughly. So rather than educating all of the ones that are watching you take small bags, you're hitting them hard, you're then backing off for a little while, you then hit them hard again. And the only other thing I would suggest is also going into night sessions, which it isn't very appealing at the moment now that the days are getting significantly longer. But if you've got an important pest control job to do, I don't know if it's a pony paddock or something, and the owner really doesn't want their beloved pet seriously hurt, and they want the rabbits eradicated, night shooting is almost certainly the way to go. They generally behave very differently under the cover of darkness. So yeah, it'd be nocturnal forays. But for daylight shooting, get on your belly. It's a bit uncomfortable. Always makes me need to pee all the time as well. I don't know if it's because I'm laying on my bladder, or just getting old. But yeah, that's the biggest inconvenience for me of sprawling out of my belly, is I need to pee every so often.
You know, one other thing occurs to me. I talked a lot about my fruit farm permission. When I first picked it up, all I could ever see everywhere was rabbits, and I tried to stalk them and ambush them, and I wasn't very successful at all. And I suddenly realised, this is 400 acres. And I was sitting in, maybe covering 30 yards of it. And the rabbits would just run away every time they saw me. And then it's only when I was driving from one part of the farm to another, and I just happened to look out of my thermal, and I could see the rabbits in the field quite happily sitting there while I drove past, that it suddenly occurred to me that the rabbits are, they attach less concern or danger to a truck or a vehicle, because they see vehicles driving around all the time that do them no harm, than they do to some bloke with a stick who's walking around like he shouldn't really be around here. So I started shooting from my truck, never looked back. So, think about the environment that you're shooting in. And, in terms of cover, if there's any like farm building kind of cover that you can use, that's gold, because it's been there forever, and rabbits will just ignore it.
Right, so that's rabbits covered.
Rabbits covered.
Next question I have, and this is from Sam Halford. It was actually while he was out pigeon shooting, was messaging me from his hide, and the long and short of it was that he's decoying over a freshly drilled crop. The pigeons were noticing his decoys and seemingly committing to them, landing amongst the pattern, and then almost immediately clearing off. Now, they weren't being spooked by his hide. He actually sent me a photo of his hide, and I was well impressed. Really, so he was very, very well concealed, but the pigeons were spooking almost as soon as they were landing, which he was finding ever so frustrating, as you would. Any tips to get around that situation, Rich?
And sometimes it can be just other activity nearby. If someone's been blasting away at the same pigeons with a shotgun and then not too far away, then they're obviously going to be spooky when they land by you. I would say think about the quality of your decoys as well. And natural birds, obviously dead pigeons in a cradle or something, are always going to outperform a decoy. And sometimes, pigeons, they're just flighty. You might have just had a bad day. Other times, I've been out decoying and the damn things will never stand still or never land long enough. And then I come back in the same spot, a week or two later, and it's like the things want to commit suicide. It's a frustrating arm of the sport, but very rewarding when it works right. I mean, if Sam's got his concealment with a hide sorted, including sort of top cover as well, then I would say it's probably his decoys is the issue. The other thing is also you can have a great, wonderful hide, but if you only sort of put it up that morning, then it's going to be something new that they're going to, especially I know we're talking about pigeons, but corvids will be suspicious of a new hide. And if you can, Sam, leave your hide in place for a few weeks before you shoot. What about you, Matt? Anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd say was Sam's hide was literally in the middle of a hedge and virtually invisible. So it wasn't that. And I thought, maybe his scope was glinting. It was a sunny day, maybe his scope was glinting. But the truth of it is, or I think the most obvious thing is, because they were obviously being hoodwinked enough to land amongst his decoys. And I would imagine that they were then almost immediately having a quick look round and clocking the fact that they were artificial birds and spooking. So I would consider making sure I'm not using shell decoys, so I'm using the most convincing full-bodied decoys that I can. I would also then think about really opening up the pattern, making it. I usually go for sort of quite a loose horseshoe or V shape, but I'd open it up a lot more than usual, in the hope that birds that drop into the middle of that pattern are further away from the artificials and less likely to cotton onto them. And then, hopefully, you do start shooting one or two, and as you've said, as quickly as possible, start even swapping out those artificial birds for real ones, because nothing ever beats a dead pigeon when it comes to decoying. Yeah, decoys are great, and they're an important part of my kit, but the sooner that I can start getting real shot birds in that pattern, all the better. And if you can keep a few in the freezer for just that occasion, it's a brilliant way to get your days decoying moving quicker. But also, you do have to just accept, as we've already discussed, pigeons are a tricky quarry to target. There are plenty of times each year that I blank going pigeon shooting with an airgun. And it's one of the main reasons why you won't see much pigeon decoying on Airgun Extra in our videos, because quite frankly, by the time me and Nikki have set aside a whole day and had a blank, it's not the way to make exciting videos. It's not a reliable way. So I think that's testament to what you're up against, really. It's not straightforward. You've got to take the rough with the smooth. There will be days when you shoot nothing, and it makes the days when it goes well all the more more rewarding.
Do you use any flappers, Matt?
No. I occasionally use bouncers. So if I'm shooting somewhere where I don't think the birds are likely to spot my decoys easily, I might use a bouncer to kind of grab their attention, to get a bit of movement. And I'll move that away from the main pattern. I'll occasionally use a flapper. And I'll tell you what, actually, I've got a remote one. So if I use that, I'll use it for the same reason. And I'll just give it, if I see birds passing in the distance, I'll give the flapper a quick flap with the remote. But if they then change their course, like they've cottoned onto the fact that they appear to be feeding birds, i.e. they've seen my decoy pattern, I stop the flapper immediately, because I think, although it's brilliant for grabbing their attention, again, when they get close, it's a bit noisy. And I just think it's going to spook them. But yeah, it can be good. But I think generally, just prop up some shot birds. Sometimes you don't even... I think a shot bird that isn't properly propped up is still better than a well-shaped artificial. So as long as you put them quite neatly, the same as you would your other decoys, facing roughly into the wind, and have them so their head's not going off to one side, that's fine. That said, it's not difficult to get a twig from the hedgerow. I try to remember to carry stiff wire, like what you would use for training roses. I don't know, 6-8 inches lengths of that, so I can prop it in under the shot bird's beak, push it into the ground, and have them set up so they look a little bit more lifelike. Being mindful not to stretch their head up too high, because if they're showing too much of those white feathers, it looks like they're craning because they're spooked, or something's made them uneasy, and that's also likely to put incoming birds on edge. So unfortunately, there is a lot that can go wrong, but I do think real birds are the solution, and you've just got to stick with it. Sometimes you get that odd day when it seems like every pigeon in the locality wants to throw itself at your decoys and stay there, and other days when even though they're committing, they will not settle. Very quickly, one other solution is also to put your decoy pattern close to a city tree. So rather than committing to the decoy pattern, if they are a bit uneasy, they'll pitch into that tree, a bit like the birds prior to dropping into my orchard where I'm currently doing some pest control. So yeah, they're dropping into that city tree. They think they're being clever because they're not dropping down onto the ground. They're actually presenting you with a more straightforward shot. They're more relaxed because they don't feel so vulnerable. So yeah, if you can set up within range of a city tree, That can be another way around it. But yeah, sometimes with wood pigeons, you've just got to put up with the fact that they just won't have it. Simple as that.
Right, so.
Simple as that. Yeah, Rich, I think that probably gets us to the end of it for this week. Oh, I know one thing I did want to remind people about is the fact that they can win a 2-day shooting experience with you.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, we'll put them up, provide accommodation. We will feed them, providing they can get to Reading. If people have a look at the Airgun Extra Facebook page and give us a follow while you're there, please, that will give you the information that you need to enter the competition to win this 2-day shooting experience with Rich. Anything else we need to say about that, Rich?
It'll be a day on the range, shooting as many guns as you want to from the ones behind me. Bring your own gun as well, obviously, if you want to. And then we'll have a little bit of dinner, a few beers, and then the next day we'll go out and we'll do some squirrel control or some rat shooting or whatever makes sense at that time. So yeah, head on to the Facebook page, and that will give you the email address that you need to send your entries into, and tell you how to enter too.
Excellent. Well, look, we will be back again before too long. In the meantime, do also have a look at the Airgun Extra website, airgunextra.com. As we've said, a new hunting article up from Rich. I've recently posted a piece also about how to find the best pellet match for your airgun, which could prove very relevant as we've been talking about ammo this evening. I want to say thanks again to Crackshot. Crackshot are based in Devon. Also, thanks to Anglia Tackle and Gun there in Norwich. As I've said, I will put links to both of their websites in the show description. Thanks to you, Rich, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Providing nationally recognised third-party accreditation through Lantra, the Airgun Proficiency course, APC, sets the standard in UK airgun training.
The Great British Shooting Show, held on the 13th to the 15th of February 2026 at the NEC Birmingham. Book tickets online at shootingshow.co.uk.